Welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, your host of the show where we sit around, we talk about gaming, we talk about game design, we talk about things that we love and inspire us about gaming. And the reason I'm starting off with this is we're approaching the 100th episode of Behind the Screen. It's kind of strange to me to think back on how this all started. I may do that as a 99th episode, a retrospective on Behind the Screen, but I appreciate all of you joining me with me on a lot of this. So, our 100th episode, we're going to talk about beauty in gaming, something that I've pondered a lot about. I've written several small essays on, and I've got an essay that's coming out in an upcoming book about this kind of idea. So, I'm looking forward to that. But today, we're going to be talking about raising up new game masters. So, I don't know about you guys, but for me, game mastering has always been a combination of oral tradition and sheer necessity. So what do I mean by that? When I got into gaming, I would probably consider myself a second generation gamer by the time I got into it, maybe third generation. But still, at that point, when I got into gaming, there was really no internet. There was a lot of great games, none of which actually did a very good job of explaining the game. We were just getting into second edition. Palladium games, which I love. I love their setting. I loved their mechanics for the longest time. But man, you can't make heads or tails of how to actually run a game just by reading the rule book. Not to say all of the people that I had played with who had grown up playing first edition or BX or OD, zero edition D&D. The stories from the earliest days of our hobby are people got these books and they fired their imagination, but they couldn't make heads or tails necessarily of how to play them. So they basically all played their own version of D&D. It's one of the things that I love about Autark's company statement, if you will. Each campaign is a law unto themselves, because it makes sense. At the time that we were starting these games, most of us were young. We're reading the rules. We're misinterpreting the rules. Some of us came to it really young, and role-playing games, at least back in the day, had no concept of being broadly accessible to a large number of people. They were difficult books to read. There was a lot of math involved, and that was okay. That was kind of in my niche and my wheelhouse. So we learned by oral tradition. And I think that still exists today. In fact, weirdly enough, the oral tradition of role-playing games now exists in shows like this, in great channels like Matt Colville, Dungeon Craft. These people who are passing on what they have learned. But you learned by doing, and you learned by being told what to do. My first role-playing experience, and I had a book for about 2 years before I actually started playing. That's what made everything connect, all the disjointed pieces. Hey, I had characters, and I knew how characters could fight, but that's basically all I knew, was able to glean from the rules. It wasn't until at lunch in 7th grade that I sat down and somebody was like, hey, do you want to play a role-playing game? And we tried it and we loved it, and everything clicked there for me. So there's this, some people have written great books about role-playing games. Arbiter of Worlds, Robin Laws for Good Game Mastering. Rule books have become better at explaining the game with examples. They've made the barrier to entry lower, but there's still something when you're sitting around with someone new and saying, hey, here's what a role-playing game is, that they don't really get it until they experience it. Now, I said there's two components for wanting to be a game master. There's the oral tradition, the learning of the game. Most of us, I would say these days, start off by participating in someone else's game and then wanting to do it ourselves. Whether that game is something at the table, virtually online, or thanks to actual play shows like Critical Role. But there's also that need. Most new game masters have a story that goes something like this. I encountered role-playing games somewhere. A friend was talking to me about them. I watched a actual play show. I saw it on The Big Bang. I saw it on Stranger Things. I want to give this a try. I want to get into a game, and there are nobody I know has played a game. I was having this discussion with someone just several weeks ago who is looking for a game in the area and not finding one that really fits their style. Like you're one more bad experience away from just starting your own group, right? We all end up kind of, the person who generally first comes to the game is the person who ends up being the GM, because they have the desire to play. So they have that desire and they have that experience. And those two things together kind of merge. And that's what creates game masters. I think that's the alchemy that creates the person who wants to run a game. So why am I talking about all of this? Well, as you know, I run several games that includes my son. My son is in 5th grade. He's about to be 11. And we've been playing 2nd edition D&D. We played Axe when he was really young. The first game I made for him was just, he wanted to play a role-playing game, and I just made a simple character sheet. He picked 2 minis. I had fighting, talking, and thinking as his only attributes. And we just started playing. But Zane loves Torg. That's the game he loves. He loves the idea of Torg. And so he came home from school last week, having taken the Torg book to school, and he has somebody who wants to try this game out. So he came to me and said, "Dad, can you teach me how to run Torg?" Well, this was awesome. I had never had the experience of teaching someone to run a game. Most of the time, I just point them to a Matt Colville video, or I will provide advice for campaigns. We've done several campaign clinics. I'll answer questions, but he wanted me to take him through how to run a game. Now, interestingly enough, I actually did a class on how to run a game. I still have all of my notes from that. There was a final project you had to turn in. You had to have a campaign prepared at the end of the class. It was one of the coolest experiences that I've been able to do, kind of blending my love of role-playing and my love of just talking over everybody, which is why I have a YouTube show now. Morning, John Doom. Good to see you. Oh, we're getting a ton of great new people in the comments. Not that last person, however. So, I sat down with my son and I've tried to figure out how to do this, like how to actually teach him how to run Torg. Because I love Torg, but as I got into explaining to Zane the moving components of Torg, I quickly realized this was not an easy game to explain to someone how to run. Take D&D or Savage Worlds, for instance. I want to do X. Excellent. Pick up these dice, roll them. If you hit, in Savage Worlds, if you hit 4 or higher, you succeed. In D&D, if you hit your target number, you succeed. But Torg's a little more complicated than that. Okay, so find your base skill. Roll your D20. Don't take that D20. Look at the bonus chart. That bonus chart then gets added back. Now, do you have a card that you want to play? Do you have a possibility? So Zane has made all of these notes. And finally, he was like, hey, I could really use a one-shot. Like, can you walk me through a one-on-one adventure? And Padre, that's exactly where I started. I started with day 1. I asked him to ask his friend what Cosm interested him most, and it's the Living Land. His friend wants to play on a Dinos. And that is awesome. And so we played through the first two scenes, or the first two scenes of the day one Living Land. Now, I do have one minor complaint, and they've gotten better at this, but if you're listening, the day one character sheets are awful. You have, under the skills, you just have the ads. So I'm making new character sheets for Zane to hand to his friend. So he doesn't have to constantly go, well, I'm rolling find, it's got a 1. What attribute is find linked to? Oh, right, it's linked to mind, and I have an 8 in that. So my total is 11. No, 10. Ha, I can math. So we walked through it, and at every step of the way, it was not like a normal gaming session. It was a one-on-one. Hey, here's what we do. Here, let's read through the scene together. Let's stop and take, place back and forth. And Zane came out with this really great thing. He commented to me. He's like, so what you're saying is, I shouldn't paint the picture. I should prepare the canvas and the paints and let the players color it in. And I'm like, yeah, that's basically, if you can get that idea, that's a great place to start as a GM. Your goal isn't to present a final picture, but somewhere between paint by numbers for a linear campaign, narrative campaign, or here's a bunch of paints and brushes. Let's go. I'll describe what's going on. So it was interesting. I think we're finally reaching a point in the hobby where game masters don't have to be forged. They can be taught. Some of us have mentioned in the chat that we have kids, my son's age, a little bit older, a little bit younger, some on the way. Think about if they get into this gaming, how cool it would be to be able to not just play games, but actually raise up new game masters. Because here's the thing. Some people may have looked at the during the whole OGL crisis. Questing Beast did a video on the crisis of game masters, at least in certain circles. But here's the thing. A lot of people are like, oh, well, this group doesn't have a problem with not enough game masters. This group doesn't have a problem with not enough game masters, but this group does. In my experience, the game master to player ratio is something like 1 to 8. I always have people asking for space at a table because the amount of game masters is wildly out of proportional to the amount of people wanting to play games. It's just not there. So I'm thinking about doing a little segment on advice to new game masters, and I know there's a ton of it out there. But I run a lot of games. I see it from a designer's eye. I think that might be something that could be helpful to people. But for me, it was just great to sit down with somebody who really wanted to learn how to run a game. So some things that stood out about this. One, no, John, he has never played watched Bob Ross, and that might actually be a shame. May have to show him some more Bob Ross. The free RPG Day adventure for Torg is, I think, also a great place to start. Let's see here. Tinker said 2E D&D. Oh, yeah, that's great. I love 2E D&D. That's the game I'm running probably the most right now. Rook said he started with Magic the Gathering and then jumped into Star Wars. And then Pathfinder. Yeah, Star Wars D6 was another one that was pretty early on in my campaign, or in my gaming life, which I saw Padre mention. Rook, Thaco is not that difficult. Maybe we'll do a video on Thaco someday, because you know what, I think there are some things that ascending AC does a lot better, just hands down. But I do think there are some things that Thaco does better. Maybe I'll have to formulate those thoughts. Wow, I know Bob Ross. I will amend this today and let you guys know what he thought about Bob Ross. But after Torg, I am going to teach him how to play Savage Worlds. So he wants to learn Savage Rifts, which I feel is a great place to start. So some things that were interesting to see through the eyes of an almost 11-year-old. Understanding the sequence of events and how target numbers are set. One thing I think that Torg does really well is each of their target numbers corresponds to an adjective for how difficult a task is. Kind of getting that in his head. I think Torg's actually, aside from its slightly higher mechanical complexity, nothing along the lines of, say, GURPS or RuneQuest, two of my early games. But I will say, GURPS probably has a much more difficult character creation and a much more simpler resolution mechanic. But Torg is help him with his improv skills, something that a lot of us, when we're coming to Game Master for the first time, we're kind of head down, reading our book, reading the block text, moving through the adventure scene by scene, because that's what we know. It's what's easiest for us. Torg takes that and says, yeah, but what if I play a martyr card? How do we do that? I'm playing this alert card. What do I see that I may not have seen before? What happens when I play Star-Crossed Romance in the Nile Empire, or Inevitable Return? Zane's going to have a very high learning curve very quickly for narrative flexibility going forward. I love that. I think that's something that takes a long time to teach, but certain games may be better at it than others. John says he wishes to have more time to GM or play. I gotta say, John, I've enjoyed our Riffs sessions. We'll have to get a session 3 in there. So here's the thing. I run my second edition game with, it is 5 people. My friend Ben, who plays in our Torg game, Kowalski, his 3 kids, who range between 7 and 11, and my son. We play every other week. Probably because it's the first one they've played. Thaco makes perfect sense to them. I will say, well, when we talk about it, there is I think TSR did itself a disservice because they put out this basic Dungeons and Dragons board game to teach, and they did a much better job of explaining Thaco in this board game than they ever did in their books. So, well, Padre, we had somebody who played it on a darkness device, so I think the romance card is far more versatile than you are giving it credit for. So, what can you guys do to help raise up new game masters in your life? Well, I'm going to plug Savage Worlds because I love Savage Worlds. In their Game Master pack, they have a great article, I think it's by Jody, on how to teach Savage Worlds, and actually any role-playing game, to kids based off their age range. That's awesome. Like, we need more resources like that. There was a great blog, what was it? Dungeons and Dads, the guy who was running D&D for his kids. But one, start playing games with people younger. You can figure out games that work for you. Cipher System is very simple, as Rook pointed out. That is a great article. Like that article in, do I have it out here? I think I took it inside. But that article on, hey, here's how to run games for kids at different levels. That's going to be a great way to get, like, most of us come to be players first, and the longer we play, the more comfortable we get with the idea. So we start playing games with kids at a younger age, we're going to get GMs who are heading into middle and high school far earlier and far better trained. Be available, be a mentor, be available to answer questions. Zane has actually asked if he can set up his Discord while he's running his game. And if any of these questions come up, he can just message me. And I was like, sure, of course, that would be great. But afterwards, we're going to talk about it. He's like, yeah, no, I get that. That's going to be helpful. Because here's the thing. One of the problems with the oral tradition is most people are much more willing to talk about their successes and far less so about their failures. I made not just bad calls, but bad storyline ideas, bad decisions from NPCs and interactions with the players that today I'm horrified by. But when I was, in 7th or 8th grade, I didn't know any better. I was just trying to make the story interesting based off the books I read, and I read books that were probably not child appropriate. I watched movies, like It and Alien and Aliens, and so I probably scarred some of my friends growing up. So be a mentor. Be willing to explain, hey, these are the mistakes. These are the things that I've done wrong that that you probably want to avoid. And then probably the hardest thing about raising up new game masters is sit down and let them run. Let them make their mistakes. Be in their games. I know it can be painful. I know it can be painful. I have sat through a lot of first-time sessions with first-time GMs. And when they ask you, how did I do? Remember to your first session and react from there. Because here's the thing, it's a skill. Running a role-playing game, being a GM, is far more art than science. Be there. Be the player who is super supportive of what the GM is trying to do. Be the wrangler. Help people figure out their die rolls. Do everything you can to build the confidence of a new GM. And you're going to have a table to play at. Because here's the other thing. Raising up new GMs is the most selfish thing we can do. It guarantees we're going to have tables to play at in the future. So, the chat has gone off on the what can I use a romance card on? And thank you, chat. I appreciate that. So yeah, they say it takes 10,000 hours to begin to call yourself a master. It's a lot of game sessions. Just know that new GMs are going to be not masters, not experts, not even apprentices. But if we love this hobby, this is the way to do it. I know a lot of people have talked about, hey, this community has more GMs, this community doesn't. I don't think that's the productive answer. I think the productive answer is, how do we get more GMs? One person was talking about complexity and how that affects who's running games in like the 5e space versus the OSR space. One person went even a step further, and it's said because a 5e GM requires you to be all of these things, from counselor to director to novel writer. Here's the thing. I don't think that's the solution or that's the answer. If my 10-year-old, almost 11-year-old can pick up Torg and be like, this is the game I'm excited about. Because the number one secret I told Zane is that no one's going to know if you've done it wrong, because no one in your class has ever played a role-playing game before. If you mess up a rule, if the scene doesn't go the way it's written, if you skip 3 pages and accidentally jump ahead, no one is going to know. And that took a lot of the pressure off of him. So, MC Fang. Let's pour one out for MC Fang. Man, I miss having Lily in our games. Maybe Lily's Velociraptor or Werewolf coat, but also Lily and her characters. There's only 27 hours a day for a year. Well, okay. So, I mean, that does bring up a point. I don't know about you guys, but when I first got into role-playing games, it was in junior high, back when it was called junior high and not middle school. Junior high, high school, and college. So basically, we played from the time dinner ended on Friday night until the time we all had to go home on Sunday. I mean, we were running 27-hour, 30-hour weekends of gaming. So that helps. I'd like to think that by the time I graduated high school, I was a better GM in college than I was in high school. When I graduated college, I was a better GM than I was when I entered. But even now, you know, I run 2 or 3 games a week. Try new things. So Rook, we'll have to do a gaming weekend sometime. It will be awesome. All right, everyone. Well, that's what I had for today. We will be, Evan and I will be doing our episode on the God Time for exploring Glorantha on Saturday. And then next week on Tuesday, we'll be back with more discussion of the Crucible of Realms, as well as the second half of our Deadlands game, Something Wicked. And we'll see what happens with the Wichita Witches, which is just fun to say, also slightly difficult. And then we're going to just continue moving forward. February's almost wrapped up. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. Thank you all for tuning in. I need more coffee, obviously. And I will see you all in a bit. Have a good one.